He was a Navy SEAL who thought he had survived everything, until he inherited a house that was never meant to be locked. The town called it a danger, a mistake, a threat waiting to happen. But his dog knew the truth before anyone else did, standing guard over a door that had saved lives long before him. On the night he finally tried to lock it, destiny came running through the storm. What followed was fire, judgment, faith, and a choice that would change more than one life. This is not just a story about courage, but about the quiet miracles that happen when we choose to keep our hearts open. If this story speaks to you, please like, comment, and subscribe to help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. The rain did not fall so much as it descended with intent, heavy and relentless, as if the sky itself had made a decision and would not be reasoned with. Wind tore through the coastal pines above the cliffs of Greyhaven, bending them into dark, bowing silhouettes. Waves below slammed the rocks with a violence that sounded almost human in its fury. Orion heard it first. The German shepherd lifted his head from the wooden floor long before Ronan Lockridge registered anything beyond the steady drumming of rain against the roof. Orion was a large dog, 70-plus pounds of disciplined muscle, black and tan coat darkened almost to ink by the low light. His ears, notched slightly from years of service, rose sharply. His body stiffened, not with aggression, but with focus. At nearly 8 years old, Orion had lost none of the quiet vigilance that once made him indispensable in war zones where hesitation meant death. Ronan was still crouched by the front door, tightening the final screw of a temporary lock. His hands were broad, scarred, and steady, moving with the practiced precision of a man who had once assembled weapons in the dark. At 40, he carried his strength differently now, less explosive, more contained. His beard was trimmed short, dark brown threaded with early gray, framing a face cut with sharp angles and eyes the color of storm water. Those eyes did not miss much, but they had learned, over the years, to ignore certain warnings from within. The lock clicked into place. Orion let out a low sound, not quite a growl. It was something closer to a plea. "Easy," Ronan murmured without looking back. His voice was calm, measured, the way it always was when he didn't trust his own thoughts. "It's temporary." The dog stepped forward and placed his body squarely in front of the door, tail low, eyes fixed not on Ronan, but on the darkness beyond the wood. Another sound came, clearer now. Footsteps, slipping, running. A figure burst from the tree line and slammed into the porch rail, breath tearing from his lungs. He was young, too young to carry the kind of fear that twisted his movements. Mud soaked the cuffs of his jeans, and rain plastered his dark hair flat against his forehead. His hands, bare, scraped, shaking, beat against the wooden door. "Please," the boy gasped, "please, open the door!" Behind him, an engine roared. Headlights cut through the rain, sweeping across the yard like searching eyes. Ronan froze. This was the moment that lived inside him, the one that never stayed buried no matter how far he ran from it. The moment where training demanded control and conscience demanded surrender. The town had given him 48 hours to install locks and barriers. He had told himself it was practical, responsible, necessary. Orion pressed harder against the door, muscles taut, breath coming slow and deep. "Don't," Ronan whispered, though he no longer knew if he was speaking to the dog or to himself. The headlights drew closer. Ronan tore the lock free. The door flew open just as the boy collapsed forward, his weight dead and sudden. Ronan caught him by instinct, pulling him inside as Orion surged past them onto the porch. The dog did not bark. He stood at the edge of the light, broad chest lifted, eyes fixed on the approaching vehicle, with a stillness that felt more dangerous than teeth. The car stopped. A door opened. A voice cut through the rain. "Jace?" The name landed like a hook in Ronan's chest. 2 days earlier, the storm had been only a rumor on the horizon. Greyhaven revealed itself slowly, the way coastal towns often did. Weathered storefronts, faded paint, a harbor that smelled of salt and old stories. Ronan arrived without ceremony, his truck rolling down the narrow road that wound toward the cliffs. He had not been back since he was 17, and even then, he had never stayed long enough to belong. The house waited where the land ended. It was a tall, narrow wooden structure, gray with age, perched just back from the cliff's edge. Shingle siding creaked softly in the wind. Windows stared out at the sea like watchful eyes. It was not beautiful in the conventional sense, but it had presence, an unmistakable sense of having endured. Orion jumped down first, stretching, sniffing the air. He moved with the careful confidence of a working dog, scanning, cataloging. Ronan watched him for a moment, then exhaled. "Well," he said quietly, "this is it." The house had belonged to Eleanor Lockridge, his foster mother, though she had never liked the word. Eleanor had been a tall woman with iron-gray hair always pulled into a loose bun, her skin lined from sun and laughter. She had raised Ronan after the state ran out of places to put him, taught him how to fix engines, how to cook without recipes, how to sit with silence without trying to fill it. She had died 3 weeks earlier, leaving him the house and a single letter. The letter did not explain the locks, or rather, the absence of them. Ronan discovered that on his first night. He stood inside the empty house, Orion at his side, and tried every door and window. No latches, no bolts, no chains, not even remnants. The frames were smooth, uninterrupted, as though the concept of locking something away had never occurred here. It made his skin crawl. By morning, word had spread. In towns like Greyhaven, news traveled faster than weather. By noon, Alden Voss arrived. Alden was a man built for authority, tall, lean, with ironed shirts and a posture that suggested rules were not just guidelines, but moral truths. His hair was sandy blonde, thinning slightly at the crown, his face clean-shaven and carefully neutral. He shook Ronan's hand with professional firmness, eyes already scanning the structure behind him. "This house is a liability," Alden said, not unkindly. "No locks, no perimeter. People talk." Ronan crossed his arms. "People always talk." 48 hours, Alden replied. "Install locks and a basic barrier, or the town steps in." Orion stepped closer to Ronan, gaze fixed on Alden. The dog did not bare his teeth, but the message was unmistakable. That night, Ronan unpacked in silence. He slept lightly, every sound pulling him halfway back to places he preferred to forget. In the morning, he went to the hardware store. Each time he lifted the drill, Orion intervened. The dog positioned himself between Ronan and the door, body firm, head low. When Ronan tried another angle, Orion lay down across the threshold, tail thumping once against the wood like punctuation. "What is this?" Ronan muttered. "You don't get opinions on building code." Orion only watched him, eyes dark and knowing. By the third attempt, Ronan's irritation had given way to something else, unease. The dog had ignored gunfire, crowds, explosions. He had never once disobeyed a command without reason. And now, here he was, guarding an absence. That afternoon, Ronan found the journal. It was tucked behind loose paneling in the hall closet, wrapped in oilcloth. The handwriting was Eleanor's, slanted, decisive. Names filled the pages, dates, short notes, gratitude, fear, relief. A sanctuary, then. Ronan closed the journal with hands that were no longer steady. He told himself it was history, that times had changed, that safety required structure. And so, on the second night, as clouds gathered offshore, Ronan installed the temporary lock. The storm arrived an hour later. And then the boy came running. Now, as the rain hammered the roof and the headlights glared through the trees, Ronan felt the old truth settle into place with terrifying clarity. Some doors existed for a reason. The voice outside called again. "Jace,
Come on, kid, you don't have to do this.
Orion did not move. Ronan stepped forward, heart pounding, and realized that whatever happened next, the house had already chosen its purpose. Morning arrived in Greyhaven the way gossip did. Sudden, loud, and impossible to ignore. By the time the fog thinned over the harbor, word had already spread that a stranger had spent the night in the old cliff house. People gathered in small knots along the road, coffee cups steaming in their hands, voices sharp with speculation. The town felt like a pan of oil set too long on heat, waiting for the first careless spark. Ronan Lockridge stood at the kitchen counter, staring into a mug he had forgotten to drink. His shoulders were squared, his posture unyielding. But inside him something remained unsettled, like sand shifting beneath a foundation. He had slept little. Jace lay on the couch behind him now, wrapped in a blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and salt, his chest rising in shallow, exhausted breaths. The boy's face, still streaked with faint lines of dried mud, looked younger in sleep. 16 reduced to something far more fragile. Orion lay at the threshold between the living room and the front hall, his massive frame stretched across the doorway like an unspoken contract. The dog's amber-brown eyes tracked every sound from outside, ears twitching at the distant murmur of voices. At 7 or 8 years old, Orion carried himself with the calm authority of experience. His black and tan coat caught the light as he shifted, muscles coiled beneath fur worn smooth by years of work and weather. He did not sleep. He waited. The knock came just after 8. It was not loud, but it was deliberate, measured, official. Ronan didn't flinch. He set the mug down and opened the door before the second knock could land. Alden Voss stood on the porch with 2 uniformed officers. In daylight, Alden looked even more composed than the night before. His pressed jacket sat neatly on his tall frame, his narrow face clean-shaven and unreadable. Pale blue eyes swept past Ronan, already cataloging what lay inside. Control, Ronan thought. The man wore it like armor. "We received a report," Alden said. His voice was calm, but there was tension beneath it, like wire pulled tight. "Possible unauthorized occupancy." Roman stepped aside just enough to block their view. "He stayed the night, that's all." One of the officers, a young man with a freckled face and an uncertain stance, glanced toward Orion and stopped short. The dog lifted his head slightly, not threatening, simply present. The officer swallowed and took half a step back without realizing it. "This house is already in violation," Alden continued. "No locks, no security, now this." "Security for whom?" Ronan asked quietly. Alden's jaw tightened. Before he could answer, another car pulled up behind them. June Marrow stepped out, closing the door with her hip as she adjusted the strap of her worn leather satchel. She was in her late 30s, average height, her build slim but sturdy in the way of someone used to standing for long hours. Her dark hair was pulled into a low, practical knot, already loosening at the edges. Freckles dusted her olive-toned skin, and faint lines around her eyes spoke of both laughter and fatigue. She wore no makeup beyond necessity, and her gaze, steady, observant, held the weight of someone who had seen people break and still chosen to believe in repair. "Morning," she said, nodding to Alden, then to Ronan. "I came as soon as I heard." Alden frowned. "This isn't—" "I know who the boy is," June interrupted gently. "Jace Calder. He's been on my list for months." Ronan felt something tighten in his chest. June stepped inside without waiting for permission, her eyes softening when they found Jace asleep on the couch. "He's flagged as high risk," she continued, lowering her voice. "Potential exploitation. Disappeared from a temporary placement 3 weeks ago." Ronan crossed his arms. "I'm not running a shelter." June turned to him then, meeting his gaze without flinching. No, but you're running a door. Before Ronan could respond, Orion rose and moved, settling himself directly between Jace and the front hall. He lay down again, chin on his paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. The message was unmistakable. June watched the dog, something like recognition flickering across her face. "He's trained," she said quietly. "But this is more than training." Ronan didn't answer. He didn't have words for what he felt pressing in on him, the sense that the house itself was listening. The officers left shortly after, Alden issuing a formal notice with clipped efficiency. 48 hours remained on the ultimatum. Locks installed or the town would intervene. Across the narrow road, Silas Dunn leaned against his mailbox, arms folded over a faded flannel shirt. At 82, Silas had shrunk a little with age, but his presence remained stubbornly solid. His white hair stuck out in all directions, and his deeply lined face carried a permanent squint, as though the world had once tried to lie to him and failed. "Locks," he scoffed when Ronan glanced his way. "You planning to fence off the ocean, too? Wind's been stealing things longer than any thief." Ronan allowed a faint smile. Silas shuffled closer, lowering his voice. "This place," he added, nodding at the house, "used to be the last stop. Folks came here when there wasn't anywhere else left to knock. Your foster mom, she understood that." The words settled heavily. That afternoon, after June left to make calls and Alden drove away, Ronan followed Orion down the narrow steps to the basement. The air was cool and smelled of damp wood and old salt. Orion stopped near the back wall, pawing gently at a warped floorboard. The sound was hollow. Ronan pried it up and found a shallow compartment beneath. Inside lay a ledger, its leather cover cracked with age. Names filled the pages, each accompanied by a date and a brief note. Safe, fed, gone. One line, written in a smaller, shakier hand, read, "Thank you for not asking me to explain." Ronan closed the book slowly, his throat tight. This was the moment, the one that caught him, held him, refused to let go. The realization that the house had never been careless. It had been intentional. Upstairs, Jace stirred, waking to the smell of coffee and the quiet presence of people who did not demand answers. He watched Ronan with wary eyes, shoulders tense, even as he accepted a mug with trembling hands. "You don't have to stay," Ronan said, though the words tasted false even as he spoke them. June shook her head. "If he leaves now, whoever was chasing him will find him. That's not speculation, that's pattern." Ronan looked at Orion, who met his gaze steadily. Outside, Alden sat in his car longer than necessary, staring at the house as if it challenged him personally. Inside, Ronan stood between a law written in ink and a promise written in wood and memory. The clock ticked loudly on the wall. 48 hours felt suddenly very short. Greyhaven split the way dry wood did under pressure, cleanly at first, then with splinters that cut whoever stood too close. By mid-morning, the town had chosen sides, though few would admit it out loud. Some spoke of Ronan Lockridge as if he were a bulwark against a cruel world, a man who had opened his door when others would not. Others whispered that he was reckless, that his house was an invitation, a mouth left open for trouble to wander in and make itself at home. In the diner on Harbor Road, the arguments clinked and scraped between coffee cups and cutlery. The sound of spoons striking porcelain landed with the weight of gavels. Judgments were passed between bites of toast, each opinion sharpened by fear masquerading as concern. Ronan sat alone in a corner booth, his back to the wall by instinct. The diner smelled of grease and burned coffee, the air thick with murmurs that bent around him without quite touching. His beard was darker in the harsh fluorescent light, the lines around his eyes deeper than they had been a week ago. He did not read the menu. He watched reflections instead, faces in the window, movements behind him, counting exits he hoped he would not need. Across the room, a woman hissed to her companion, "Hero today, headline tomorrow," and Ronan felt the words land without piercing. He had learned long ago how to let noise pass through him. What unsettled him was not the judgment, but its speed. Towns did not fracture this quickly without someone leaning on the fault line. June Marrow slid into the booth across from him, dropping her satchel at her feet. Her shoulders sagged as she exhaled, dark strands of hair escaping the knot at the nape of her neck. She looked tired in a way sleep would not fix, the kind of tired that lived behind the eyes. Still, her gaze was sharp. "Every placement I called is suddenly full," she said quietly. "Every emergency bed, every temporary guardian. It's too neat." Ronan nodded once. "That's the smell." June tilted her head. "Smell?" "On missions," he said, voice low. "The trap that's too clean is the one you worry about. No loose ends means someone tied them." June stared at the tabletop, jaw tight. She wanted to argue. He could see it. She believed in systems because she had to. Without them, everything she did would collapse into chaos and grief. But belief did not blind her. It strained now, like fabric pulled too far. Jay stayed inside the house that day, curtains drawn, Orion never more than a few feet from him. The boy moved like someone expecting to be grabbed at any second, shoulders hunched, eyes darting to every sound. He was thin, his dark hair unevenly cut, as if he'd taken scissors to it himself. There was a sharpness to his face, cheekbones too prominent, jaw clenched too often, but beneath it lay a softness he worked hard to conceal. By afternoon, the name surfaced. Clint Rourke arrived with the tide. He pulled up to the house in a polished SUV that looked out of place on the narrow road, its dark paint spotless despite the salt air. Clint stepped out with the confidence of a man accustomed to being welcomed. He was in his late 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, his build softened slightly by comfort rather than age. His hair, a carefully managed silver brown, was combed back from a face that might have been handsome, if not for the practiced warmth that never quite reached his eyes. He wore an expensive jacket over a simple shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest approachability. "Ronan!" Clint called, spreading his hands as if greeting an old friend. "I heard you were having some trouble." Ronan stepped onto the porch, Orion at his side. The dog stopped half a step ahead of him. Clint's smile flickered, not gone but recalibrated. "And you must be Orion," he said lightly. "Beautiful animal." Orion did not move. He did not growl. He did not bark. He did not bare his teeth. He stood still, head slightly lowered, eyes fixed on Clint with an intensity that seemed to drain the air between them. It was a silence that pressed, that demanded attention. Ronan felt it settle over his shoulders like a warning. "This town takes care of its own," Clint continued smoothly. "I run a foundation, youth outreach. Maybe I can help place the boy somewhere appropriate." From inside, Jace watched through a narrow gap in the curtain. His face drained of color. His fingers tightened around something small and dark clutched in his hand. Ronan met Clint's gaze. "We're fine." Clint's smile widened. "Of course you are. Just thought I'd offer." As he turned to leave, Orion shifted, placing his body squarely between Ronan and Clint, blocking the man's line of sight back to the window. The movement was deliberate, precise. Clint paused, then laughed softly. "Protective," he said. "I like that." When the SUV disappeared down the road, June let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "That's him," Jace whispered later, his voice barely audible. He sat at the kitchen table, knees drawn up, eyes fixed on the floor. "He smiles when people don't look." He placed the USB drive on the table like a confession. It was small, unremarkable, deadly. Night fell, uneasy. Ronan couldn't sleep. At 2:13 a.m., Orion rose abruptly and nudged his leg with insistence that allowed no argument. The dog moved toward the porch, glancing back once, eyes bright with urgency. Outside, the air was cold and damp. The tide was low, the beach stretched out pale under the moonlight. Orion led him down the path toward the sand, nose low, tracking. That was when Ronan saw it. Fresh footprints marked the wet sand below the cliff. Heavy tread, deliberate. Beside them, a drag mark cut through the surface, uneven, as if something, or someone, had been pulled toward the water before being released. Ronan crouched, fingers brushing the edge of the mark. The sand was still dark, still wet. "Someone was here," he murmured. Orion's ears flattened. He looked out toward the ocean, then back toward the house. The message was clear. This was no accident, and it wasn't over. Silas Dunn chose the late afternoon to talk, when the light slanted low and turned the sea into a sheet of dull silver. He sat on the worn wooden bench across the road from Ronan's house, his long coat pulled tight around a frame that had grown thinner with age, but not weaker in spirit. His hands, large and knotted with old injuries, rested on the head of a cane he rarely needed but always carried, more habit than necessity. His face was a map of years lived honestly, deep lines around sharp eyes that had once been quick to judge and were now quicker to remember. "You keep looking at that place like it's deciding whether to forgive you," Silas said, not unkindly. "Figured it was time you knew why." Ronan stood with his arms folded, Orion seated at his heel. The dog's coat glowed faintly in the evening light, black along the spine, tan at the chest and legs, his posture calm but alert. At nearly 8, Orion had the stillness of something that had seen enough danger to recognize when it lingered nearby. Silas cleared his throat. Long before zoning laws and committees, there was a handful of women here. Widows mostly. Some never married. Some ran from men who thought love meant ownership. They made a promise, no questions, no locks. If someone knocked, the door opened. Ronan felt the words settle slowly, fitting into places he hadn't known were hollow. They weren't saints, Silas went on. They argued, they were afraid. But they understood something the rest of us forget. Safety isn't always about walls. Sometimes it's about timing. Silas's gaze drifted to the house. Your foster mother, Eleanor, she was the last one. Kept it going when the others passed. Never talked about it much. Didn't need to. That night, Ronan returned to the ledger in the basement. He sat on the cold steps, Orion beside him, and turned page after page. Names blurred together. Men, women, children. Some entries were neat, others frantic. Between them lay gratitude, written in different hands, different levels of education, but all carrying the same weight. Relief. One line stopped him cold. This door made me trust adults again. The handwriting was clumsy, uneven, clearly a child's. The sentence struck Ronan with the precision of a thrown spear, clean, unforgiving, and impossibly accurate. He closed his eyes, breath shallow, remembering his own childhood, the endless shuffle of locked offices and careful smiles that never quite reached safety. Above them, Greyhaven began to transform. Banners went up along Harbor Road, blue and white fabric snapping in the breeze. Vendors rolled in carts, and strings of lights appeared like constellations tethered to lampposts. The Lighthouse Night Festival was coming, an annual ritual meant to draw tourists and money and optimism in equal measure. The town buzzed with anticipation, a surface cheer that barely concealed deeper currents. Alden Voss watched it all with visible unease. He moved through inspections with increasing frequency, his neat clipboard always under his arm, his jaw perpetually tight. To him, crowds meant variables, and variables meant loss of control. His concern narrowed predictably on Ronan's house. This is exactly when things go wrong, Alden said during one visit, eyes scanning the open doorway. No barriers, no way to regulate who comes and goes. Ronan said nothing. He was learning when silence carried more weight, Clint Rourke, meanwhile, flourished. His foundation banners appeared beside festival signage, his smile everywhere, on flyers, in photographs, in conversations overheard at the market. He shook hands easily, laughed loudly, and spoke of opportunity. The town listened. Orion noticed the smell first. It was faint, riding the wind off the harbor, sharp and clean in a way that didn't belong. The dog's head snapped up as Ronan walked the shoreline path with Jace one evening. Orion's nostrils flared, his body tensing before he changed direction abruptly, pulling hard against the leash. "Easy," Ronan muttered, but he followed. The smell grew stronger near an abandoned boat shed at the far edge of the docks. Bleach. Too much of it. The kind used not to clean, but to erase. Orion whined softly, pawing at the warped door. Inside, the shed told its story in silence. Rusted chains bolted to the wall, a stained mattress dragged into a corner, scratches on the wood at shoulder height. Ronan's jaw clenched, memories surfacing unbidden, rooms like this in places he preferred not to name. "This is where they held them," Jace whispered, voice barely steady. Ronan rested a hand on the boy's shoulder, grounding them both. Back at the house, life continued in small, deliberate acts. Ronan taught Jace how to fold a blanket until it held warmth instead of creases, how to breathe slowly when panic crept in, counting heartbeats instead of seconds, how to look someone in the eye without flinching. "You train everything, don't you?" Jace said one evening, a ghost of a smile appearing. "Even the mop?" Ronan snorted softly. "The mop listens better than most people." The humor didn't erase the fear, but it softened its edges. June visited late, exhaustion etched deep into her posture. She moved through the house like someone memorizing an escape route she hoped never to need. When her phone rang, she stepped outside, face tightening as she listened. When she came back in, the color had drained from her cheeks. "There's an emergency order," she said quietly. "Temporary seal, 24 hours. Ronan felt the floor tilt beneath him. At the same moment, Orion rose sharply, ears pricked. The back door stood ajar. Jace was gone. Greyhaven swelled beyond its own seams as lighthouse night descended upon it. Strings of lights glimmered across Harbor Road. Food trucks lined the curb in bright, clashing colors, and music drifted from the square in waves that felt too cheerful for the tension underneath. Tourists laughed, children ran with glowing sticks, and the town wore celebration like a borrowed coat, bright, ill-fitting, easy to tear. Ronan moved through the crowd with Orion close at his side, the leash loose but unnecessary. The dog's large frame cut a steady path, black and tan coat brushing past strangers who barely noticed him. At nearly 8 years old, Orion carried himself with disciplined restraint, head low, eyes scanning ankles and shadows rather than faces. His tail stayed still, his focus unwavering. This was not play, this was work. Jace's disappearance had left a hollow in the house that Ronan could not ignore. He felt it with every step, a pressure behind the ribs, sharp and constant. The boy had been there, breathing, learning, trusting, and now he was not. Ronan knew that feeling too well. In the teams, you learned quickly that absence was louder than gunfire. The festival cameras had been no help. Every request Ronan made ended with the same shrug, the same apology. Technical issues, corrupted files, a failure that landed with uncanny precision on the exact hour Jace vanished. Ronan smelled it again, that same artificial neatness, the kind that followed intent. Silas Dunn, however, had never trusted systems to tell the whole truth. He arrived in a battered windbreaker, his white hair plastered flat by sea mist, irritation etched deep into the lines of his face. "I swear," he muttered as he tapped his cane against the pavement. "I retire and suddenly the universe thinks I've got nothing better to do." Silas moved with surprising speed for a man his age, leaning in close to a portable monitoring station set up near the docks. The technician on duty, a young woman with tired eyes and a ponytail pulled too tight, froze when she recognized him. "Evening, Deputy," she said out of habit. "Evening," Silas replied dryly. "Mind showing me the backup feed, the one the system keeps just in case?" She hesitated, then sighed, fingers moving across the keyboard. "You didn't hear it from me." The footage flickered to life, grainy, off-angle. But there, between two laughing tourists, Ronan saw a flash of familiar dark hair, a shoulder turning too sharply. Jace, being guided, not dragged, toward the side street where festival lights dimmed and trucks idled. Ronan's jaw tightened. There. Orion stiffened beside him, ears pricking. The dog turned abruptly, nose lifting, then angled his body toward the row of food trucks lining the pier. He began to pull. "Orion," Ronan said, already moving. He trusted this more than video. They wove through the crowd, music thudding against Ronan's chest, laughter brushing past like static. The scent hit him before the sight. Oil, grease, and beneath it, something metallic and wrong. Orion stopped in front of a produce truck painted with smiling fruit, its side door ajar just enough to reveal darkness within. The driver stood nearby, a broad man in his 30s with a shaved head and a stiff posture. His eyes darted when Orion fixed him with a stare. The dog stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his chest rising as a low sound vibrated through him. Not a bark, not a growl, but something deeper. A warning meant for prey. The man took a step back without thinking. Ronan saw the rope then, the flash of pale fabric inside the truck. Jace's sneaker, scuffed and unmistakable. "Step away," Ronan said calmly, his voice carrying just enough edge to cut through the noise. The man bolted. Ronan moved fast but controlled, grabbing the door and hauling himself up. Inside, the air was stale and hot. Jace lay bound against crates, eyes wide, fear giving way to relief as he recognized Ronan. Orion leapt in after him, placing himself between the boy and the open door, body rigid, teeth bared now, not in rage, but in finality. Ronan cut the rope with swift efficiency, hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding him. "You're okay," he said, though he knew better than to promise. "I've got you." Shouts erupted outside. People noticed. Phones lifted. Someone yelled for security. Clint Rourke appeared at the edge of the crowd, like a man stepping into a spotlight he had rehearsed for. His jacket was gone now, sleeves rolled up, hair slightly mussed to look concerned rather than caught. His eyes met Ronan's for a fraction of a second, and something cold passed between them. "Open doors invite trouble," Clint called, voice smooth and amplified by the moment. "I warned you." Then he disappeared into the chaos. Police swarmed in minutes. Jace was ushered away, wrapped in a thermal blanket, June pushing through the crowd to reach him. Her face crumpled when she saw him alive, then hardened with something like resolve. She caught Ronan's arm briefly, fingers tight. "I lost someone once," she said, voice shaking but steady. "Followed every rule, did everything right, and still—" She stopped, swallowing. "I won't do that again." Ronan nodded. He understood fear shaped by loss. He lived with his own. By the time the crowd thinned, Alden Voss arrived, his expression carved from stone. He carried a new lock in his hand, heavy and bright under the festival lights. "This ends tonight," Alden said. "You install it, or I will." Ronan stood before the house as the old wooden door loomed behind him. It looked ancient now, the grain darkened by time, the frame scarred and sturdy. It reminded him of a throat, open, vulnerable, vital. To seal it felt like an offering, a sacrifice made not to gods, but to fear. Inside, Jace slept fitfully. Orion lay across the threshold, eyes never closing. Ronan did not take the lock. The rumors came faster than the tide. By morning, whispers claimed Ronan had staged the rescue, that the boy was part of a scheme, that the house was a performance. And somewhere between accusation and applause, the USB was gone. They came at dusk, when Greyhaven's light thinned into a metallic blue, and the sea held its breath. Alden Voss led the line up the narrow road, clipboard tucked under his arm like a shield, his posture upright, his steps measured. He looked older tonight, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes deeper, the set of his mouth harder, as though he had decided that doubt was a luxury he could no longer afford. Behind him followed 2 officers and a municipal worker carrying a roll of red tape, the color startling against the weathered gray of the house. People gathered without being asked. Neighbors leaned against fences, stood on porches, clustered near the road. It felt less like a procedure and more like a trial held in open air. Whispers rose and fell, a tide of half-judgments. Some faces were tight with satisfaction, others drawn with unease. A few avoided looking at Ronan Lockridge altogether. Ronan stood on the porch, shoulders slumped, for the first time since anyone in town could remember seeing him. At 40, his body still carried strength easily, but tonight it was burdened by exhaustion that no amount of discipline could conceal. His beard was darker in the failing light, his eyes rimmed with the kind of fatigue that came from being forced to explain yourself to people who had already decided not to listen. He had answered questions, repeated facts, swallowed anger, and still the ground beneath him shifted. Inside the house, Orion lay near the threshold, his large frame angled toward the door, ears alert. The German shepherd's black and tan coat caught the light in sharp contrasts, the muscles beneath it coiled and ready. At nearly 8 years old, Orion moved with a deliberate calm that bordered on solemnity. He sensed the change in the air long before anyone spoke. Alden stopped at the bottom of the steps. "Mr. Lockridge," he said, voice carrying easily, "this is an enforcement action. We're here to seal the property." Ronan nodded once. He did not argue. He did not plead. He simply stepped aside. That, more than anything, unsettled the crowd. June Marrow pushed through the onlookers, breath quick from the climb. She looked smaller against the gathered town, her slim frame wrapped in a jacket too thin for the wind coming off the sea. Her dark hair had escaped its knot, strands whipping against her face. There was something fierce in her eyes tonight, something stripped of caution. She stepped forward before Alden could speak again. "Safety isn't about locks," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor running through her hands. "Safety is about knowing when to open a door." A ripple passed through the crowd. Someone scoffed. Someone else went quiet. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout, dense and uncomfortable, like a truth that refused to be moved aside. Alden hesitated. For a heartbeat, his eyes flicked to the house, then back to the people watching him. Responsibility settled its weight on his shoulders. He gestured, and the municipal worker stepped forward, affixing the seal to the doorframe, the new lock gleaming and alien against old wood. Orion rose. The dog did not bark. He pressed his nose to the seam of the door, inhaled, then froze. His ears flattened. His head snapped toward the rear of the property, muscles tensing as a sharp, acrid scent reached him on the wind. Gasoline. Orion lunged backward, colliding with Ronan's legs, then spun, nails scraping hardwood as he raced toward the back door. Ronan followed without thinking, the sound of voices outside dissolving into urgency. Behind the house, the storage shed erupted in flame. Fire leapt fast, greedy and loud, heat rolling outward in a wave that forced people back. Smoke thickened, black and choking, swallowing shouts and turning order into panic. Someone screamed, another stumbled. The crowd scattered, instinct overtaking judgment. Clint Rourke moved through the chaos like a man who had planned for it. He emerged from the shadows near the side yard, his jacket gone, his face set in something cold and intent. He was no longer smiling. His hair was damp with sweat, his eyes sharp and searching. He did not look at the fire, he looked toward the house. Jace. Orion saw him first. The dog burst through the smoke, body low, teeth bared in a soundless snarl. Clint swore, stepping back as Orion's presence cut off his path like a living wall. The moment stretched, man and animal locked in a stare that stripped away pretense. Ronan coughed as smoke filled the hall behind him. He felt Orion slam into his legs, forcing him back from the doorway just as the heat surged. The dog turned, darted into the smoke without hesitation, then reappeared, dragging at Ronan's sleeve, urging him forward. Inside, confusion reigned. The new lock jammed as people pushed, panic turning it into a trap. A neighbor, a middle-aged woman with ash-blonde hair and a startled expression, collapsed near the door, overcome by smoke. Hands clawed uselessly at the sealed exit. Ronan did not think. He acted. He drove his shoulder into the door, once, twice, pain flaring white-hot. The wood cracked with a sound like a confession torn free. On the third strike, the door gave way, splintering outward. Fresh air rushed in, chaos spilling with it. Orion was everywhere at once, nudging the unconscious woman toward safety, barking sharp commands that cut through fear, circling back into the smoke when Ronan called his name. The dog's training surfaced fully now, stripped of gentleness, focused on survival. Silas Dunn emerged coughing, one arm wrapped protectively around a younger man he had hauled from the crush. Blood streaked Silas's temple, his flannel singed, but his grin was stubbornly intact. "Told you," he rasped, pain threading his humor. "Locks just make everything slower." Sirens wailed in the distance. The fire was contained before it could reach the house, but not before it left its mark: blackened wood, scorched earth, the smell of fear clinging to everything. Clint was gone. Jace was safe, huddled with June near an ambulance, eyes wide but alive. He clutched her sleeve like an anchor. Ronan stood amid the wreckage, chest heaving, hands shaking as adrenaline drained away. He looked at Alden, who stood frozen near the road, the clipboard hanging uselessly at his side. For the first time, Alden's mouth opened without law ready behind it. "I was wrong," Alden whispered. Ronan nodded, too tired for triumph. Somewhere beyond the smoke and the lights, Clint Rourke vanished into the night, unfinished business trailing behind him like a shadow that refused to die. Greyhaven did not wake up kinder after the fire. Ash still clung to the back lot, the shed remained a charred skeleton, and suspicion lingered in conversations the way smoke lingered in fabric, faint but stubborn. People did not change overnight, not in towns that had learned to survive by narrowing their circles. What changed instead was smaller, quieter, and therefore more durable. They stopped calling the house a risk. No announcements were made, no apologies delivered. The word simply fell out of use, replaced by a cautious neutrality. The house became the place near the cliff again, the one with the wide porch and the dog who watched like a lighthouse with fur. It was not embraced, but it was allowed. In Greyhaven, that counted for something. Ronan Lockridge spent the first morning after the fire sweeping soot from the porch boards, his movements slow and deliberate. His shoulders ached where he had driven them into the door, a dull reminder of the night when fear had turned procedure into a weapon. He worked shirtless despite the cold, skin marked with old scars that caught the light in pale lines. His beard had grown uneven, his eyes darker but steadier now, as if exhaustion had burned away what little uncertainty remained. Orion lay nearby, head resting on his paws, eyes following Ronan's movements. The German shepherd's coat bore streaks of ash that refused to brush out completely, a testament to where he had been and what he had done. At nearly 8 years old, his muzzle showed faint silver at the edges, but his posture remained disciplined, alert without strain. When Ronan paused, Orion rose and pressed his head briefly against Ronan's hip, a grounding weight, then settled again. Alden Voss arrived without ceremony, He looked different now, though the change was subtle. His jacket hung looser, his tie absent. The rigid precision that once defined him had softened into something closer to humility. He carried a folder under his arm instead of a clipboard, the papers inside creased from handling rather than untouched. "I've been thinking," Alden said, stopping at the bottom of the steps. His voice lacked its usual edge. "About what enforcement is supposed to protect." Ronan leaned on the broom, listening. Alden explained the framework he'd drafted: temporary emergency shelter designation, minimal intake, no mandatory reporting unless imminent danger existed. It wasn't perfect, it would be challenged, but it would stand, at least for now. "We'll call it the Merrow Lockridge House," Alden said, glancing up. "Your foster mother deserves to be named." Ronan nodded once. She would have hated the paperwork. Alden allowed a faint, rueful smile. "So do I." June arrived later, with 2 coffees gone lukewarm in her hands. She wore an old sweater that smelled faintly of smoke and soap, her dark hair pulled back hastily, eyes rimmed with fatigue that matched Ronan's. They stood together on the porch, sipping without comment, watching Orion patrol the yard with measured steps. There was no declaration between them, no moment heavy with expectation. Instead, there were small negotiations: where to hang the temporary curtains, how to clear the last of the debris, whether the coffee maker should live on the counter or the shelf. They argued quietly, laughed once or twice, and fell into a rhythm that felt earned rather than claimed. Love arrived like dawn, Ronan thought later, not with spectacle, but with clarity. The call came in the afternoon. A deputy named Mark Halverson, broad-shouldered, early 30s, with a square jaw softened by concern and a habit of rubbing the back of his neck when thinking, stood at the edge of the yard, radio in hand. He spoke carefully, as though words themselves could spook what came next. "We picked up a lead," he said. "Your dog might help." Orion was already alert, ears pricked, body angled toward the road as if he had known before anyone spoke. They drove north, past the familiar bends of the coast, into a stretch of abandoned industrial land where warehouses slumped like forgotten thoughts. Orion rode in the back, standing steady despite the turns, nose lifting now and then as the air changed. His focus sharpened with every mile, a quiet certainty guiding him forward. The warehouse sat low and wide, its corrugated sides rusted, doors partially ajar. The smell hit Orion first, human fear layered beneath oil and old metal. He whined softly, then pulled, insistent but controlled. Inside, Clint Rourke waited. He looked smaller without the town around him, his expensive clothes rumpled, his carefully maintained composure fractured. Sweat darkened the collar of his shirt, and his eyes darted at every sound. When Orion entered, Clint backed away instinctively, palms raised. Ronan did not rush him. He didn't need to. The evidence followed quickly, entries in the old ledger Silas had turned over, names that matched missing persons, dates that aligned with Clint's charity events. Jace's testimony filled the gaps the paper could not. Clint was taken without drama, his mask finally stripped away, revealing nothing beneath worth saving. When it was over, Orion sat beside Ronan, chest rising and falling slowly. Work completed. Jace returned to the house that evening under temporary guardianship arrangements that felt fragile but hopeful. He stood awkwardly in the doorway, a duffel bag at his feet, eyes flicking from Ronan to June to Orion, as if afraid the scene might dissolve if he stared too hard. "You can stay," Ronan said simply, not as an offer, as a fact. Jace nodded, throat working. "I'll try not to mess things up." Ronan considered him for a long moment. "We'll mess them up together," he said. "That's how it works." The lock came down at sunset. Ronan held it in his hand, heavy and cool, the metal catching the last light of day. He did not throw it away.
he did not hide it. He mounted it on a hook inside the hall, where anyone entering could see it. A reminder, not a warning. Orion lay across the threshold as night settled in, eyes half closed, breathing slow. The door remained open, unguarded by anything but choice. And for the first time in a long while, that was enough.
Sometimes the miracle does not arrive with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through an open door, a timely kindness, or the courage to choose compassion when fear feels safer. God does not always change the world around us in a single moment. Often, He changes the world through ordinary people who decide to listen, to open their hands, and to trust that love is stronger than control. In our daily lives, we are given small chances to become part of that miracle, by protecting instead of judging, by welcoming instead of closing off, by choosing mercy when the rules feel easier. If this story touched your heart, may it remind you that no act of kindness is ever wasted, and no open door goes unseen by God. Please share this story with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment with your thoughts or your prayer. And if you believe in stories that heal, protect, and restore faith, consider subscribing to this channel so we can continue this journey together. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps. May He watch over your home, your loved ones, and every open door in your life.